your habit. You don't open those links on those emails from strange addresses. You don't pick up that USB in the parking lot and plug it into your computer. When you have critical systems, nuclear systems, I would say pipelines and certain other infrastructure, you ring fence it. You make sure that its computer systems are simply not connected to outside systems. And you have to discipline, you have to enforce that rigorously. People can't have personal emails coming into the plant. And then you have to consider hiring what are called white hat hackers to try and hack into your system, or offering bonuses to people who are successful at hacking into your system and then explain to you where the weaknesses. And we will come to that because there's ethical issues there. What are the big mistakes? Do not make your password your cat's name. Right? Oh, I see some looks there. Maybe somebody did that. Maybe I shouldn't have used that example. In any event, you need a password that has arbitrariness to it, that is not easily guessed. Don't use the same password for multiple purposes, right? Don't use the same password for multiple people. Avoid phishing and spear phishing. What is phishing? Phishing is when you get random incoming emails that try to get you to open a link. And of course, the link is an executable file, which loads malware onto your machine, and then any number of problems can arise from that. Spear phishing is when it's not merely randomly sent out, it's directed at you because someone knows who some of your contacts are and sends something that is likely to make you feel that it is coming from a trusted source. I'm just going to say, when you have any doubts about trusted sources, there's the Alexander Graham Bell second way of checking. Dial up, speak to somebody on the phone, because likely if they pick up the phone and answer and it's a voice you recognize, that's pretty tough to fake. Careless administrators. That would be me. That's why it's a good thing why I'm not an administrator. If you have a careless administrator and someone hacks into the administrator's position, you can see that that's a big problem. Yeah. All of these things. Number 9 is quite important. Your IT department needs what's called a sandbox, where you bring in unknown stuff and it's fenced off from the rest of your system, but you can open it up and find out whether the thing is diseased or not. And then you need to keep your software up to date. You need to keep patching, because inevitably there's it's when you go to this link at the top, Labs that Protect Against Online Warfare, it says that it's no longer on YouTube. But in fact, if you type in the title, exactly that YouTube video comes up, and it's a little bit disturbing. At least I find it disturbing. I grew up in the 1960s, so all of this stuff is disturbing. And then there are other things. When you're designing hardware, it's not helpful if you design hardware and then you manufacture it, and when it arrives at your customers, it already has malware on it. You'd say, well, how could that possibly happen? Well, it has. Now, we talked a little bit about bug bonuses to get white hat hackers to hack your stuff, to find the flaws in it so you can improve your defenses. Well, whether something is a bug bonus or extortion sometimes depends on your point of view. Obviously, if you hired the guys ahead of time and you know them and they do it, that looks a lot like a bug bonus. But if they come to you afterwards and say, oh, by the way, we found this little flaw in your software, how do you feel about that? And clearly they're looking for money. Well, that doesn't look so much as a bug bonus as it looks like an attempt to extort money. And again, so here we have the Pentagon, which clearly has a big interest. So they're offering bonuses, and you think, yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, sure. But then we see how it played out for Uber at one point. Uber had a problem. They paid the guys off, and then surreptitiously they went to try and find the guys and get them to sign a confidential disclosure agreement so that they would not publicize the fact that they had succeeded in hacking Uber systems and extorting $1 million from them. And then they wanted to characterize that as being a bug bonus. And there are two things that Uber did that some people might think they didn't notify their shareholders right away, and they didn't notify the regulator right away. Like if you are a public reporting company, if you're on the New York Stock Exchange, you have to report things like this to the SEC. Okay? So this is a while ago, and relative to things that have happened subsequently. Anyhow, so were they paying a bug bounty, or were they paying extortion? It depends on your point of view. Okay, and with cyber hygiene, no matter how good your systems are, if your personnel do not buy into the processes and do not follow them rigorously, it's like having an open window in the winter and the cold air is coming in, right? Everything has to be tight. So that's company issues. Personal issues, we're going to move on to privacy here. Okay. Privacy and divorce. I'm not sure why I started with this one, but some divorces are ugly. This and other vital information will come in this lecture. The husband was angry about the divorce, so he put a tracker on his former wife's car and bugged her devices and stalked her. Stalkerware is still available on the internet. Where are your children? It's 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? Well, it turns out that it's used for more than keeping track of your kids. It's used for stalking people. Okay. Again, there's a demonstration on the BBC that is, it's a little bit funny, but when you think about it, it's a serious thing. What is a sock puppet? A sock puppet is a persona on social media that pretends to be something that it isn't. It's not just giving yourself a fake name. It's giving yourself a fake persona, typically with the objective of influencing people in respect of their opinions or in respect of buying things. Here we have different. One reason you get sock puppets is because people have been banned from various services, so they want to come up with another identity and come back. When you have, vote for your favorite characters for a film, or your favorite for the All-Star game, for your favorite players, whatever, sock puppets are often used to basically ballot box stuff. Sometimes they're used to set up straw men, which is, say, to present arguments that are ridiculous for the purpose of making it easier for those arguments to be knocked down and discredited. There are many, many strategies having to do with sock puppets. The meat puppet thing is basically to create a market for a new product, to make a new product appear as if it is popular, and so therefore generate momentum to get other people to buy. What is astroturfing? Everybody here know what astroturfing is? Can I skip this? I got some and maybe not some. Okay. In political and also in commercial, but mainly in political context, grassroots political movements have a certain credibility in a democracy. This is the voice of the people. Well, it's less the voice of the people if you are a particular industry that has a huge interest in a particular policy issue, and you clandestinely fund what would otherwise appear to be grassroots organizations that spring up out of nowhere and suddenly have incredibly well publicized, organized, and funded rallies, because we all donated 10 cents in a little tin cup. Well, no, Astroturfing is when a major player tries to disguise itself and create what appears to be a grassroots movement when it clearly is not. It is a manufactured movement. It is AstroTurf. That is a serious problem, actually. What is catfishing? I'm guessing there's lots of people here know what catfishing is, right? You create something that's very attractive to people, and thereby they will open links that they shouldn't open, and thereby upload executable files that they shouldn't. And the classic style of catfishing, here we see Israeli soldiers duped by Hamas fake women phone ruse to get them to give away secrets. Classic. Yes. What's this? Well, Amiri botnet. You get an attacking computer to hack into many processing devices. And electronic thermostats that can be remotely programmed were a classic one. There are a whole bunch of remotely programmable devices that typically do not have very good software security, particularly if they're old, right? When we lived in a more naive, a more innocent and less suspecting world. When you have enough of them, they can all be directed to contact the same address at once. And if you get millions of computers to contact the same address at once, you will bring down that service. It's a denial of service attack, right? There are many ways that this can be done. Here we go, there's denial of service. Now, as it turns out, there's facial recognition software, yes? Yes. Well, these folks in, I think it was Vietnam, based on photographs of people available on the internet, they were able to make up essentially mannequins and use the mannequin on the screen to deceive facial recognition software. Here's some things that happen on the internet. Internet challenges. Okay. Well, this challenge was particularly attractive to young children between the ages of 8 and 13. And the challenge was to hide in an IKEA store overnight. And you think, oh, well, that's kind of fun. Bit of a prank. But it's not a prank when people get injured. And when store security has to deal with lost children. And then there's the issue of swatting. This one, some young men were playing a video game, a military video game, and one of them wanted something from the other and didn't want to pay the price. And the amount of money involved was, I think, $1.50 US. And so the guy who was annoyed contacted a swatter in California, who then posted an emergency, I'm holding 2 children in a house demanding ransom and it's a violent situation, for the name and address of what the first guy thought was the other guy's location. Well, it turned out it was someone completely unconnected with any of it. And a SWAT team showed up at the fellow's house. The fellow heard sounds in the bushes outside his door in the dark. He went to his front door, stepped out on the porch to look around to see what was happening, and the police shot him dead. Yeah. What's big data? Big data is information that is collected for some purpose, healthcare, employment, taxation, whatever. You collect it and you have a database, and it's a relational database that has all these data points collected together. It's useful information, particularly if you have several databases and you can cross-reference them together, because then you can form a picture of people's behavior. Here we go. We have We have involuntarily provided data, which is to say data that has been stolen, right, through hacking or other means, and there's a market for stolen databases. And who uses it? And sorry, there's also voluntarily provided, obviously. Who uses this data? Well, it turns out that big data is really useful for forming a much more accurate picture of the people who are likely to buy your stuff, if you can make the right correlations. So for retailers, this is a huge advance over simply advertising in the Scarborough Post or the Nepean Clarion when I was a child. That's what is putting local media and traditional media and broadsheet journalism out of business, because the advertising revenues are going to sites that browser track and use big data to direct specific ads to people who are more likely to respond to them. It's a much more precise approach. Okay. Obviously, if retailers can do this, the same way that you sell soap, you can sell Mayor Quimby. So clearly it's important for politics, and also foreign state and non-state actors. This information is used in many hostile ways. Obviously, it's valuable to organized crime, and I should point out that there are some foreign governments whose conduct in cyber world is largely indistinguishable from organized crime. There's no line of demarcation between hostile foreign government action and organized crime. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the field of stealing industrial espionage or in the field of basically trying to influence elections. The statement at the top of this, you want to memorize. If you are not paying for the product, you are the product. Every time you go on social media, you should be thinking about that. When you post things on social media, personal information, pictures of your children or grandchildren, do I want all this personal information out here? I mean, for most of us, the horse left the barn a long time ago, right? There are benign uses of big data. When I use Waze to find the fastest way home and slip through the streets and I'm home in half the time, I think that's great, right? Or if you want to control lights and whatever in your house, monitor your house while you're away, make sure that it's the right temperature, the pipes haven't frozen, that's a great thing. But there are lots of less benign apps, okay? When companies browser track, and particularly browser tracking without any notice that they're browser tracking, and from your browser behavior, they're tracking what your likes and dislikes are, and they can form a very precise and very intimate picture, psychological picture of you, from which they're going to determine, okay, we'll send advertising there, and what's more, we'll send influencing material there that will make the people be more likely to be receptive to our advertising. There's a feedback loop on it. And then you see whether the person's browser behavior changes due to your prompting. It's a form of grooming, okay? And the same techniques that are used, again, to sell soap or breakfast cereal can be used to sell I want a generic and non-pejorative term for this, to sell military struggle for causes that you believe in, or in fact to sell things like white supremacy, which is a huge problem. More than 3/4 of all domestic terrorism in North America is now white supremacy. Another 1/8 is for religious causes. It's huge, and this is a big problem. Another not so benign app was a thing called Girls Around Me, and what it was very popular with young men. It allowed you to give the thing a radius, 500 meters, a kilometer, whatever, and it would then bring up a map, like, Google Maps would bring up the map, and it'd bring up an icon for every girl near you, and you could press on the icon, and then it would bring up all the information about that girl that was available on the internet, whether from photos or address or personal. Some people found that a little creepy, and the US government shut that one down. Okay, you can see where that would be a problem. So is data breach a serious problem? Oh, well, obviously it is, right? These are old. The slide's kind of old, but this is a huge, huge, huge problem. And of course, companies that suffer from data breach end up with huge liability, right? Oops. These are non-commercial, right? These are all I was going to make a pejorative comment about one of those, but I'll just leave it. For that, you have to pay more. Okay, so theft of information is huge. And of course, it has effects on people's careers. People, very senior people, get the chop over this one, right? So we talked about the importance of cyber hygiene and how do you deal with data breach? Well, typically companies become aware of data breach roughly 18 months after the hackers have been there. Okay? So by the time you find out about it, that ship has sailed, right? So you need your response team in place before you know that you have a problem. You need a team, you need insurance, you need a plan to mitigate, you need a plan to deal with public relations, particularly if you're a publicly reporting company. A lot of things on the internet are excused because they are allegedly done by consent. These are activities that do not appear to break any laws, and yet they are troublesome. You put a chip in your toy that reports back to you through the electrical system to monitor how the kids play with the toy, which gives you ideas how to improve the toy. But some of us think that once you buy a toy for your kid, the manufacturer needs to butt out. Here we go. Smartwatch that communicates back to the manufacturer what your kid's doing. My kids are all grown up and I find that. Look at that, misleading. And also it tended to cause where it was a software app, it tended to cause the app to influence the child in ways that would cause consumer behavior of either the child or the parent. And of course, it's all subliminal, right? There's no disclosure. We're tracking what you're doing. Therefore, everything you do, we're going to use to try and influence your behavior. There's no big warning on your thing that says that. They're just doing it. How do you feel about Google knowing everything that you've purchased from Amazon in the last 6 years? I guess they're going to like history a lot. Here we go. Typically, when you go to any website, a new website, to look at their products, whatever you're doing, you're browsing, you're going to get 250 to 500 cookies uploaded on your machine. Do you want that? Not so much. Do you clear off your browser data every time? How about this one, Fitbit? Members of the US military, fitness is really big in the military, right? So you go out and you do your run every day. But the whole time you're running, it's tracking where you're running. And of course, where these people were running basically outlined the perimeter of a secret base. Oops. Is that a problem? Yeah. Has it gone too far? Well, decide that for yourself. There's suggestion that there's internet anonymity. This slide, I think, is a little bit out of order. There is effectively no internet anonymity. You may think there is, there isn't. When you're in a database that's been anonymized, typically you can de-anonymize more than 90% of a consumer database, consumer information database, with less than 4 data points. 4 data points or less. Yeah, so this is a big, the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal. I think Cambridge Analytica has now gone bankrupt and been put out of business, right? It's disappeared because, of course, the publicity from this would have killed their business anyhow. Yeah, this is the, again, more divorce problems where the former husband had uploaded software on his wife's phone that basically allowed him to know who she was talking to listen in on any calls, to know where she was going, what she was doing. For less than $100 US, the New York Times was able to purchase and set up facial recognition software in a public park, and was able to identify virtually everybody crossing that public park. It's a big series of articles in the New York Times. There's a reason why the New York Times is the New York Times. It is a really good news service, but I will stop my advertising right now. But it is a really good news service. It's a good thing. It's a really good thing that governments don't get the idea that they could use facial recognition software to spy on people. Because that would be kind of, you know, if you've read 1984, you'd be a little concerned about that, right? So you'd be glad that governments don't do that. Except, oh, oops. Governments do that. And in fact, the government of China has a huge export market among authoritarian governments all around the world to sell the software on basically tracking information. So you better not go to that Simon Garfunkel concert, because they're going to get you for your missing speeding tickets that you haven't paid the fine on 73 years ago. Like, you're done. I shouldn't joke about that because it is serious. And so now China wants to introduce a system where you get points or not points, sort of like SH trading stamps, on whether you jaywalk or whether you're rude to people, or it's petty, it's childish, and it doesn't belong in any nation that respects its own people. But they kind of like it. At least the government of China does. I'm pretty sure that lots of people don't like it. How do you enforce? Well, we have a case in Canada where enforcement was given against third-party ISP to take down defamatory content. Problem was that the defendant was in the United States, and we simply couldn't be enforced. And that's a little frustrating. If you're dealing with defamation, you've got a bona fide cause. But on the other hand, do you really want governments to be able to force people to take down stuff? Would you like the government of China to be able to force the Globe and Mail to take down its coverage? Not so much. Okay. And generally, authoritarian governments, when they go into the surveillance field, they don't adapt. Like, they go big time into it. To the point, this one kills me. They're so into it that they're banning a TV dating show. It's very difficult to figure out what the threat to the state was from a TV dating show. And here, the government of China will not allow representations of President Xi as Winnie the Pooh. Apparently, they're quite sensitive to this issue. You would think that people would have a better sense of humor than that, but that's not what the essence of running an authoritarian government is. You gotta love President Obama as Tigger, though. That just kills me. China's gone further. You know, we talked about forming a psychological profile of people from their browser behavior. That psychological profile is very intimate, and it's also predictive, which is why it's so valuable to advertisers, right? Well, the government of China has taken that one further. We're going to predict the people who are going to commit crimes, and we're going to deal with their crimes before they commit them. Guilty, not only guilty until proven innocent, guilty before you even did it. This is, I was about to say this is like marriage with my wife, but I'm just I'll leave that alone. After a while, your spouse knows what you're thinking even before you think it. So the problem here is, how do we have a multi-jurisdictional internet where people with legitimate concerns, either with property rights or with issues of the person, such as defamation, where they can find a remedy, and rightfully so, but at the same time, we protect civil rights, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly. How do we do that in the lawless Wild West of the media without empowering authoritarian governments to misbehave? Okay, there's sort of different categories of problems. We talked about stuff that isn't against the law, but it seems pretty offensive. I need to go a little faster than this, I think. Here we're going to talk about things that are against the law, but they come in different flavors, right? Sometimes you steal confidential information from a competitor because you want to use it. But sometimes you steal that information with a vandalism approach simply to damage what the person has. That's old time. But then there's the ransom approach. Ransoming people's information, of course, is new in our age. Okay? So when they take that, they don't really want your data. They just want you, for you not to have it, as opposed to for them to have it. And we also get attacks where sometimes, particularly hostile foreign governments, want an attack to look like one thing when it's actually something else. Okay. So we talked about this. Mossack Fonseca, we'll come to that in a bit. When I first prepared this lecture, it was largely about logistics systems and heavily about railroads. So there's lots of logistics examples in here. It's a warning to anybody in the transportation business that the entire transportation business around the world is phenomenally vulnerable to electronic attack. Okay, here we go. One of these was they managed to hack an oil rig, a movable oil rig with legs that can go up and down. Well, if you tipped it far enough, it would fall over. And these are, multi-$100 million structures. So the ransom on that would be significant. But also, people who were importing drugs were able to hack into container terminal information to route the containers to themselves without people knowing, so that you could bring in a shipping container full of cocaine and route it to where you want without people knowing. Or you could find out where there was a shipping container full of TVs, and instead of them going to San Diego, they're offloaded to Portland, and your guy picks them up and they're hijacked and sold on the black market. Lots and lots and lots of variations of this problem. Yeah. Go Transit was hacked by a hacking source in North Korea, which what the North Koreans wanted with Go Transit, who knows? But there you go. Train problems at the municipal service in Melbourne, Australia. San Francisco had a hack. But San Francisco, instead of paying the ransomware, they just said, okay, well, we'll let everybody ride for free. And they let everybody ride for free until they fixed it, which didn't reward the bad guys. And there's worse things that can happen than people riding public transit for free. Ransomware striking hospitals. This is a serious one, right? People die because of this. We don't get access to our electronic records. We're now doing everything with pen and paper in the good old fashioned way. People die. A British firm and a German firm cooperated to set up basically a fake railroad, and to see how often and what kinds of attacks it would receive. And sure enough, it was attacked a lot. 2.7 million times over 6 weeks. That's okay. 41% of the attacks came from China. I'm a little surprised. Moldova, when you read Moldova, you should be reading Russia. When it comes to criminal activity over electronic media, Russia would be a world leader. Yeah, same thing. Because I'm in the rail service, I have all of these examples involving trains. Okay. So we talked about denial of service. There are kinds of hacking where the intruder doesn't want you to know they're there because they're bleeding you continuously, and the longer they can do it, the happier they are. But of course, there's other kinds of hacking where the intruder not only wants you to know that they're there so that they can extract ransom, but they may want the public to know that they're there to destroy your reputation as a business. Ransomware. Well, we've talked a fair bit about this already. Maersk, largest container shipping company in the world. You have millions of containers on the high sea, and someone hacks into your data and prevents you from using it to know what containers you've got to offload at Long Beach or not, or Dubai or Rotterdam. That's ouch. We know yeah. What do they attack? Municipalities get attacked a lot. Typically what gets attacked is their billing systems for electricity and water, whatever, property taxes. That's a big issue. Atlanta refused to pay, and so for more than 6 months, they did everything by hand, and they thought they had it fixed, and they started it up again, and then found that the hackers had been there longer than the period before their previous backup. So in fact, the malware was in the backup stuff too, and they just restarted the attack. But to Atlanta's credit, they didn't give in. Colonial Pipeline, well, that's this year. We all know about that. If you're in the travel business, denial of service attacks are a problem, right? Botnets are flooding your system so that your customers can't book their flights or their hotels or figure out when the aircraft is coming to take them home. Okay. Here's a railway system again in Sweden, similar problem, denial of service. So we talked about this before, and I'm going to repeat again. You have to know what it is you have that you need to secure, because it's trying to secure everything or trying to say that everything has equal priority is not an effective way to deal with these breaches. Okay, and then you need to assess how ready you are to face attacks. What kinds of people do you have? where are the gaps? Where do you need to fill the gaps with personnel who have skills to protect yourself? If you're in the cybersecurity business, this is a really good time to be in the cybersecurity business. And you have to get people, again, to implement and follow policies, procedures, and plans. And you have to keep the plans current. But you have to do it. Hygiene requires diligence. And it's repetitive. You have to do it over and over and over and over and over. And then you have to have people test your own systems. And your response team has to be in place long before you know you have a problem. Some of this is now being enforced through the establishment of a duty of care on people who hold data, right? And if you don't meet the standard for what a reasonable person would do to protect data, liability is going to flow. Okay, the parts we haven't covered, I didn't talk about encryption. Encryption's important. Two-factor authentication is important, but also getting rid of the stuff you don't need is important. And not collecting the stuff you don't need is also important. Employees. Almost all of these breach problems come from human error, sometimes intentional. I didn't talk about limited access, but limiting people's access, like if you don't need to know about the other part of the plant, why do you have access to their systems? Okay, not many, well, not many, that's wrong. A certain kind of attacks actually do involve the substantive analysis of data. That's what big data correlation is about. So we get, in those cases, the intruder probably does not want to be detected, because the longer they can remain undetected, the more value they can extract from your database. Credit card or banking information, darn right. Yeah. Banking, consumer behavior, and voting locations and preferences. Those are all. Yeah. So again, lessons, we control what kind of machines we're using. We make sure that machines are a particular type, that are a particular standard, and that we know what's on them. You monitor them. You constantly monitor. And yeah. And this is here, yeah, this is an example. You have something that looks like it's supposed to be extorting money, when in fact what you're trying to do is bring down a foreign nation's computer systems to affect their national security. This is the point on de-anonymization. Just 4 points of reference with fairly low spatial and temporal resolution was enough to uniquely identify 95% of them from 4 data points. When you're browsing on the web looking for Christmas shopping stuff, how many data points do you generate in 15 minutes? Several thousand. Again, this has been subject to litigation, and it is everywhere. HP laptops were delivered with key tracking software on them, new from the factory. Is that a problem? We've talked about this a little bit. Power plants, yes. the dominance of Russia in this particular field of expertise was so great that the US government put out a notice in respect of US critical infrastructure, basically saying, watch out for anything Russia does. Talked about that one. We've talked about all of these things. And I'm waiting to, yeah, here's all sorts of steps. All the things you have to do. We talked about assessing risk. Didn't talk about involving your key stakeholders and making sure your insurer's notified, but obviously you have to do that. You had better have retained legal counsel beforehand. They're part of your response team that you organize ahead of time. Dealing with communications is PR. You're going to have to send out legal notifications as required, not merely for enforcement, but also to like the SEC, the OSC. Okay. And what are you going to do to mitigate? Right. The issue with notification, there's so many of them that what are you going to do? And there's a thing called notification fatigue. And you have to manage. I'm not as far along as I wanted to be, so we're going to skip. Oh yeah, yeah. There's a hot potato issue here, right? With databases as to who's responsible. With our thing about if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. It's because the value of the data is so great. So. You always want more of it because it's like more money in your pocket. But of course, it's also more risk. And that's the hot potato problem. So here we go. Yeah. It's a problem. You need to limit how much information you collect. Don't be greedy, limit. And you have to safeguard it. You have to, no matter how much it hurts, you have to be forthright in your disclosure when you've got a problem. Because if you aren't, you are just building up bigger liability. And you need to have your policies and you need to keep records diligently. Yeah. This is the truth, right? If you're the one holding the data, it's your problem. And now, a word from our sponsors. Gotta come back after the ad.
Yes, so let's return at 3:10, all right? And that will be switch it off. All right.
Okay.
See you at 3:10, everyone.